The snowflakes fell lazily from a pearl gray sky, dusting the wooden steps of Salvation Creek's only church. They melted almost instantly on the hard-packed earth where Eliza Sullivan knelt, seeping through her woolen dress to chill her skin. She focused on that cold, the sharp bite of it against her knees, the way it crept through the fabric like searching fingers. Better that discomfort than acknowledging the weight of the stairs pressing down upon her from all sides. "Look upon her," Reverend Isaiah Sullivan's voice boomed across the town square, carrying to the furthest corners, where latecomers still hurried toward the impromptu gathering. "Look upon my daughter who has broken God's covenant and brought shame upon this house." Eliza kept her eyes on the ground. 7 months she had managed to hide her condition beneath loose dresses and careful movements. 7 months of silent prayers and desperate planning, all undone when her father had discovered her packing a small bag the previous night. 7 months she has hidden her sin beneath loose dresses and lies. Isaiah continued, his voice rising with each word as if speaking directly from her thoughts. 7 months of deception while living under my roof, eating at my table. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Eliza resisted the urge to cover her swollen belly with her hands. Such a protective gesture would only further confirm her sin in their eyes. Instead, she remained motionless, a statue of shame before the church where she had spent every Sunday of her life. "What does the good book tell us about fornication?" Isaiah demanded, scanning the crowd with eyes that burned with righteous fire despite the winter chill. "It is a sin against one's own body," someone called out. "Indeed," Isaiah nodded approvingly. "And what of those who deceive? They shall have their portion in the lake of fire," another voice responded dutifully. From her position on the ground, Eliza could see only boots and the hems of dresses. But she knew these voices. Mrs. Patterson from the general store, who had always slipped Eliza an extra piece of candy as a child. Mr. Grayson, who had taught her to read alongside his own children. People who had smiled at her just last Sunday, now condemning her with verses she herself had memorized in childhood. "She will be sent to the Salvation House in Helena." Isaiah announced, his tone one of sorrowful finality. "There perhaps she will find redemption for her soul, if not for her body." The Salvation House. Eliza had heard whispers about such places where fallen women were sent to have their babies in secret only to have them taken away. Places of hard work and harder punishment, all in the name of salvation. "Stand up, Eliza," her father commanded. "Face your judgment." Slowly, painfully, Eliza raised her head. The faces before her blurred through unshed tears, Mrs. Patterson looking away uncomfortably. Dr. Powell, the old physician, his expression pained. Sheriff Holloway standing to the side, a strange satisfaction in his eyes that made Eliza's skin crawl. At the back of the crowd, half hidden in shadow, stood a figure Eliza hadn't noticed before, an elderly woman with silver hair peeking from beneath a dark shawl. Martha Reed, the widow who lived on the edge of town. Unlike the others, she wasn't watching Eliza but staring at Isaiah, her gnarled fingers worrying at something around her neck. "I said stand," Isaiah repeated, his voice colder now. Eliza struggled to her feet, one hand automatically moving to cradle her belly. The child within kicked, as if protesting this public shaming. "The wages of sin is death," Isaiah intoned, "but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Death would be preferable to the shame you have brought upon this family." Eliza flinched. Her father had never struck her, not with his hands. His words had always been weapon enough. "Look at her," he commanded the crowd. "Let her be a warning to your daughters." It was then, as Eliza finally lifted her gaze to the assembled townspeople, that she saw him. Not at the back of the crowd, but moving through it, parting the sea of onlookers like Moses through the Red Sea. A tall man with broad shoulders and a beard streaked with silver. His clothes were simple but well kept, a worn leather vest over a cotton shirt, durable trousers and boots that had seen many miles. There was something familiar about him, something that stirred recognition in the older members of the crowd. Whispers followed in his wake. "Is that? It can't be." After all these years, Eliza didn't know him yet. There was something in his steady gaze that caught and held her, not judgment or pity, but understanding. Recognition, perhaps not of her face, but of her pain. The man stopped before the church steps, looking up at Isaiah. For a moment, the two men stared at each other, a history Eliza couldn't decipher passing between them. "Noah," Isaiah said, the single word falling like a stone into still water. "Noah." The name meant nothing to Eliza, yet it clearly meant something to her father and the older members of the town. Tomorrow, Isaiah continued, recovering his composure. Sheriff Holloway will escort her to Helena. The child, when it comes, will be given to a God-fearing family who can raise it without the stain of its conception. No, Eliza whispered, the word escaping before she could stop it. Isaiah's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I said no, father. Her voice was stronger now, fueled by the sudden fear of losing her child. This baby is mine. I won't give it away. A shocked silence fell over the crowd. No one defied Reverend Sullivan, least of all his own daughter. You have no say in the matter, Isaiah replied, his calm tone belying the anger flashing in his eyes. You surrendered your rights when you surrendered your virtue. The stranger Noah moved then not toward Isaiah but toward Eliza. To her astonishment, he knelt beside her in the dirt. What are you doing? Isaiah demanded, genuine confusion breaking through his righteous facade. I'm a sinner too, Reverend, Noah said simply. If the lady must kneel for her transgressions, then I'll kneel beside her. We all fall short of the glory, do we not? A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd. Some looked uncomfortable, others intrigued. Sheriff Holloway stepped forward, hand resting on his gun belt. You're causing a disturbance, mister, Holloway said, though his eyes revealed recognition as well. State your business in Salvation Creek, or move along. Noah ignored him, his eyes still on Eliza. My name is Noah Blackwood, he said quietly. I have a place outside of town. You'd be welcome there if you've need of shelter. Eliza stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. A stranger offering sanctuary when her own father was casting her out. It seemed impossible, yet the steady certainty in his eyes suggested he meant every word. This is absurd, Isaiah sputtered. Eliza, come here this instant. Noah stood, offering his hand to Eliza. The choice is yours, Miss Sullivan. The crowd held its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting for her decision. From the corner of her eye, Eliza saw Martha Reed step forward, placing a restraining hand on Sheriff Holloway's arm. The old woman whispered something that made the sheriff hesitate, his hand dropping from his gun. Eliza looked at her father, the man who had raised her, who had taught her to read from the Bible, who had once carried her on his shoulders at the town fair. She searched his face for any sign of the father she had loved, but saw only the unyielding Reverend. Then she looked at Noah's outstretched hand. The Bible teaches mercy before judgment, Reverend, Noah said quietly. It speaks of a shepherd who leaves 99 sheep to find the one that's lost. Don't presume to quote scripture to me, Isaiah warned, his face flushing. I presume nothing. I merely remember the words of our Lord, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. Eliza reached up and took Noah's hand. The touch of his calloused palm against hers felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. With surprising gentleness, he helped her to her feet. Eliza Sullivan, her father's voice cut like ice. If you leave with this man, you are no longer my daughter. Eliza paused, her hand still in Noah's. The pain that lanced through her chest was almost physical. Despite everything, he was still her father. I stopped being your daughter the moment you decided my shame was more important than my well-being, she said softly. Just as Abigail stopped being your daughter when you forced her to marry Thomas Wright. Isaiah paled at the mention of Abigail. You will not speak her name. Someone should, Eliza replied. Someone should remember her as more than a fever that took her too young. With that, she turned away from her father for the first time in her life. Noah led her through the parting crowd, past the whispers and stares, toward a chestnut mare tethered at the edge of the square. Behind them, Isaiah called out, This isn't over, Eliza. You cannot hide from God's judgment. Noah helped her onto the horse, then mounted behind her. Hold tight, he murmured, and with a gentle nudge, the mare began to move. As they rode away from Salvation Creek, Eliza didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see her father's face, couldn't bear to see the town that had watched her shame without intervention. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the distant mountains, their peaks already dusted with early snow. Why, she asked as the town receded behind them. Why would you help me? You don't know me. Noah was silent for a long moment, the rhythm of the horse's hooves filling the space between them. I know enough, he finally said. I know what it looks like when someone's drowning in public while everyone just watches. The simple truth of his words struck Eliza to her core. She had been drowning slowly for months. Years perhaps, ever since Abigail. She stiffened suddenly, realizing she had just left with a complete stranger. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, a new fear edging into her voice. "I have a small place about 5 miles east of town," Noah replied. "Used to be a chapel before the war. It's not much, but it's peaceful. You can stay as long as you need. Then I'll take you wherever you want to go." "You were watching during what happened," Eliza said. "Why were you in town?" "I come in for supplies once a month," he explained. "Usually try to avoid Sundays, but my coffee ran out." The absurdity of it, that her entire life had changed because a stranger ran out of coffee, almost made Eliza laugh. But the laugh died in her throat as she realized the magnitude of what she'd done. She had nowhere to go. No money, no family, and a baby coming in less than 2 months. "I don't know where I'd go," she admitted quietly. "Then don't decide today," Noah said simply. "One day at a time is enough for anyone." They rode in silence after that, following a narrow trail that wound through pine forests and open meadows. The land grew wilder, the trees taller, as they left the settlement behind. Eliza's back ached from the unfamiliar motion of the horse, but she didn't complain. Each step took her further from her father's judgment, from the Salvation House, from the possibility of losing her child. After nearly an hour, they crested a small hill, and Noah's home came into view. Eliza had expected a simple cabin, but what stood before her was indeed a small chapel, its steeple rising modestly above a stone foundation. The walls were weathered wood, the windows intact but unadorned. A thin plume of smoke rose from a chimney at the back. "You live in a church?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Used to be a mission chapel before the war," Noah explained as he guided the horse toward a small stable beside the building. "The congregation moved into town after the last minister passed. I bought it when I came west." "Were you a minister?" Eliza asked, suddenly curious about this man who quoted scripture so easily yet lived alone in the wilderness. A shadow passed over Noah's face. "Once," he said, and offered nothing more. He helped her down from the horse, his hand steady as she found her footing on the ground. Up close, Eliza could see the chapel had been modified for living. The large front doors replaced with a more practical entryway, a covered porch added along one side, wood pile neatly stacked against the wall. "Come inside," Noah said. "You must be tired." The interior surprised her even more. What had once been a sanctuary was now a simple but comfortable living space. The altar area had been converted into a kitchen with a cast iron stove and a wooden table with 2 chairs. The nave held a sitting area with a stone fireplace, a rocking chair, and a small sofa. A ladder led to a loft where Eliza presumed Noah slept. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "Few things ever are," Noah replied. He moved to the stove and stoked the fire within. "Are you hungry?" Eliza nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow feeling in her stomach. She hadn't eaten since early morning, before her father had discovered her packing a small bag planning her escape. That seemed a lifetime ago now. "Sit." Noah gestured to the table. "Rest." Eliza sank gratefully into a chair, watching as Noah moved efficiently around the kitchen, warming a pot of stew that had been simmering on the back of the stove. There was something fascinating about watching this large man perform such domestic tasks with practiced ease. "Have you lived alone long?" she asked. "About 7 years," he replied, setting a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread before her. "Since after the war." Eliza wanted to ask more, but the aroma of the food drew her attention. She ate hungrily, surprised by how good the simple meal tasted. "Thank you," she said when she'd finished. "For the food, for everything." Noah nodded, pouring her a cup of tea. "There's a room behind the kitchen," he said. "It's small, but it has a bed and a window. It was meant for visiting preachers back when this was still a chapel." "Where will you sleep?" Eliza asked. "The loft is my space," he replied, nodding toward the ladder. "You'll have your privacy, Miss Sullivan." "Eliza," she corrected him. "Please call me Eliza." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Eliza." Then, as the day faded into evening, Eliza found herself seated in the rocking chair by the fireplace, the steady creak of the runners against the wooden floor oddly comforting. Noah had given her a blanket and retreated to the kitchen, allowing her space to process the day's events. The fire cast dancing shadows across the walls of the former chapel. Though the pews and pulpit were gone, something of the building's former purpose remained, a sense of sanctuary of peace. For the first time in months, Eliza felt she could breathe. Her hand moved to her rounded belly, feeling the gentle movements of the child within. "We're safe," she whispered. "For now, we're safe." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows gently. Montana winters were harsh, But inside the converted chapel, the air was warm. Eliza's eyelids grew heavy, the emotional exhaustion of the day catching up with her. She didn't realize she had fallen asleep until a soft touch on her shoulder startled her awake. "The bed's ready," Noah said, stepping back as soon as she opened her eyes. "You'll be more comfortable there." Eliza nodded, too tired to speak. She followed him to the small room he had mentioned, where she found a narrow bed with a fresh quilt, a small table with a lamp, and a chest for clothing. "Sleep well," Noah said, closing the door behind him as he left. Alone in the unfamiliar room, Eliza changed into the nightgown she had managed to bring in her small bag. As she lay down on the bed, the events of the day washed over her again. She had left her home, defied her father, and placed her trust in a stranger, all in the space of a few hours. What kind of woman did that make her? What kind of mother would she be? The questions circled in her mind, but the pull of sleep was stronger. As she drifted off, Eliza thought she heard the soft strains of a hymn not sung, but hummed in a deep baritone. The melody was familiar, a song of comfort her mother used to sing when Eliza was very small. For the first time since she'd discovered her pregnancy, Eliza slept without dreams. Morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the small window. For a moment, Eliza was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then memory returned, the public shaming, the stranger's intervention, the ride to this converted chapel. She dressed quickly in her spare dress, smoothing her hands over the fabric stretched tight across her belly. The child within stirred, a reassuring movement that brought a small smile to her lips. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found the main room empty, the fire banked to glowing embers. A pot of something oatmeal, by the smell of it, sat warming on the stove. A note rested beside it, written in a surprisingly elegant hand. "Gone to tend the animals. Please help yourself to breakfast." Eliza served herself a bowl of the thick oatmeal, adding a drizzle of honey from a jar on the table. As she ate, she studied her surroundings more carefully than she had the night before. The conversion from chapel to home had been done with care. The high ceiling remained, but the walls had been lined with bookshelves. Eliza was surprised by the number of volumes, not just religious texts, but history, poetry, and what appeared to be medical books. One shelf held a collection of carved wooden animals, a bear, a deer, an eagle in flight. They were beautifully crafted, each detail rendered with obvious skill. On another wall hung a single-frame photograph, a woman with a serious expression seated beside a cradle. Eliza moved closer, drawn by the woman's eyes, which seemed to hold both strength and sorrow. "My wife Clara," Eliza startled at Noah's voice. She hadn't heard him enter. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping back from the photograph. "I didn't mean to pry." "It's not prying to look at what's in plain sight," he replied, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "Clara would have liked you." Eliza glanced back at the photograph. "She's beautiful." She was, Noah agreed, a wealth of meaning in those two simple words. "The fever took her and our son during the war, while I was away." "I'm sorry," Eliza said again, feeling the inadequacy of the words. Noah nodded once, accepting her sympathy without comment. "Did you find the oatmeal?" "Yes, thank you." Eliza returned to the table, grateful for the change of subject. "It was good." An awkward silence fell between them. Now in the clear light of day, the strangeness of their situation seemed more pronounced. Eliza was acutely aware that she was alone with a man she barely knew, miles from town, with no one aware of her whereabouts except her father, who she was certain would rather see her in the Salvation House than safe in Noah Blackwood's home. "Mr. Blackwood," she began hesitantly. "Noah," he corrected. "Noah," she agreed. "I'm grateful for your help yesterday, truly, but I don't want to impose on your hospitality indefinitely." He regarded her steadily. "Where would you go?" The question hung in the air between them. Eliza had no ready answer. She had cousins in Virginia, but they were her father's family, unlikely to welcome a pregnant, unmarried niece. Her mother's people were strangers to her, names in a family Bible without faces attached. "I don't know," she admitted finally, "but I can't stay here forever." "Why not?" Noah asked simply. "The room is yours for as long as you need it. I keep to myself and the town rarely comes calling." "Because it's not proper," Eliza replied, falling back on the proprieties that had governed her life. "A single woman living with a man she's not related to." A faint smile touched Noah's lips. "I think we're well past worrying about appearances, don't you?" Eliza felt her cheeks warm. Of course he was right. Her ruined reputation could hardly be made worse by taking shelter with a reclusive widower. What will people think? She asked, more to herself than to him. The same things they already think. Noah replied, his voice gentle but matter-of-fact. People make up their minds quickly and change them slowly. In my experience, it's a waste of time to base your decisions on their opinions. He moved to the stove, pouring himself a cup of coffee from a pot Eliza hadn't noticed. Stay until the baby comes, he suggested. Then decide. Winter's setting in. It's no time for a woman in your condition to be traveling anyway. His practical approach disarmed her. There was no hint of judgment in his manner. No suggestion of impropriety in his offer, just simple human kindness extended without expectation. All right, Eliza agreed. Until the baby comes. Noah nodded, accepting her decision without further comment. He settled into a chair across from her, cradling his coffee cup in large hands. Do you know when that will be? He asked. Dr. Powell in town said late January or early February, Eliza replied. But he wasn't very interested in examining me closely. The memory of Dr. Powell's discomfort, the way he had kept his interactions brief and clinical after learning of her condition, still stung. Dr. Powell, Noah asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Eliza nodded. You know him? We've met, Noah said, something guarded entering his expression. He's not a bad man, just cautious. Your father holds considerable influence in town. Yes, Eliza agreed bitterly. God's representative on earth, or so he reminds everyone at every opportunity. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with years of accumulated resentment. She immediately regretted them. Whatever her feelings toward her father, speaking ill of him to a stranger felt like another transgression. But Noah didn't seem shocked by her outburst. It's a heavy mantle to wear, he said, being God's voice. Some men wear it lightly with humility, others. He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Eliza understood. Were you really a minister? She asked suddenly, the question that had been nagging at her since she'd seen the converted chapel. Noah's expression shifted, becoming more distant. Yes, he said after a moment. Before and during the war, I was an army chaplain with the Union forces. But not anymore, Eliza prompted gently. He looked into his coffee cup as if the answers lay in its depths. No, he said finally, not anymore. The simplicity of his response, the finality in his tone, discouraged further questions. Eliza sensed a wound there, still tender, despite the passing years. I should earn my keep while I'm here, she said, changing the subject. I can cook, clean, mend clothing. I'm good with a needle. You don't need to earn your stay, Noah replied, but I won't deny a few home-cooked meals would be welcome. I'm a passable cook, but uninspired. Then we have an arrangement, Eliza said, feeling better for having established some form of exchange. Being purely dependent on his charity would have been difficult to bear. The day settled into a quiet rhythm after that. Noah went out again to split firewood while Eliza familiarized herself with the kitchen. She found it well stocked with basic provisions: flour, sugar, coffee, dried beans, and preserved meats. A root cellar accessed through a trap door in the floor held potatoes, onions, and apples. By midday, she had bread dough rising near the stove and a pot of bean soup simmering for dinner. The simple domestic tasks grounded her, providing a sense of normalcy amid the upheaval of her life. Through the window, she watched Noah work, his breath visible in the cold air as he swung the axe with practiced efficiency. There was something reassuring about his methodical movements, the steady thunk of the axe splitting each log cleanly. As the afternoon waned, Eliza's back began to ache, a familiar discomfort in these later months of pregnancy. She lowered herself into the rocking chair by the fire and allowing herself a moment of rest. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the firm roundness beneath her palm. For so long, this child had been her secret, a hidden shame. Now, away from her father's condemnation, she could finally acknowledge the small life growing within her, not as punishment, but as possibility. What will become of us? She whispered to the child. There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. But for the first time in months, Eliza felt something like hope stirring alongside her fear. The door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air, and Noah, his arms laden with firewood. He stacked the logs neatly beside the hearth, then straightened, brushing wood chips from his sleeves. Something smells good, he observed, nodding toward the kitchen. Bean soup and fresh bread, Eliza replied. Nothing fancy, but it will be ready soon. Noah nodded appreciatively. I'll wash up. As he moved toward the basin of water, he kept near the back door. Eliza noticed him wince slightly, rolling his left shoulder, as if to ease a stiffness there. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "Old wound," he explained briefly. "Axe up in cold weather." "From the war," Eliza ventured. Noah nodded. "Antietam," he said, naming one of the bloodiest battles of the conflict. "I was tending to a dying boy when the shell hit. I was lucky. The boy wasn't." The matter-of-fact way he described it only emphasized the horror. Eliza tried to imagine it, the noise, the chaos, a young chaplain, kneeling beside a wounded soldier while battle raged around them. "You were brave," she said softly. Noah looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "No," he replied. "Just doing what needed doing. There's no bravery in that." Before Eliza could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. They exchanged glances. Visitors were clearly unexpected. Noah moved to the door, his posture alert but not alarmed. When he opened it, Eliza was shocked to see Martha Reed standing on the threshold, medical bag in hand. "Mrs. Reed," Noah greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. "This is unexpected." "I thought you might need these," the older woman said, holding up the bag. "Dr. Powell sends them, though he couldn't come himself." Noah stepped aside, gesturing her in. "Of course, please come in." Martha entered, stamping snow from her boots. As she lowered her hood, Eliza saw that her face was lined with concern. "Miss Sullivan," she nodded to Eliza. "I'm glad to see you looking well." "Mrs. Reed," Eliza greeted her, struggling to rise from her chair. "Stay seated, child," Martha said, waving her back down. "In your condition, you shouldn't be getting up for the likes of me." Noah took her coat, hanging it near the fire to dry. "What brings you out in this weather?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. "I came to warn you, Tesu," Martha said, finally looking directly at Eliza. "Your father is gathering support for a rescue party. He's convinced Noah has bewitched you, somehow led you astray." Eliza's chest tightened with fear. "When?" "Soon," Martha replied. "He's been speaking to the congregation about Christian duty and protecting the innocent. Most see through it, but some, those who depend on his good opinion or share his rigid views, are listening." "Holloway," Noah asked, his voice carefully neutral. Martha's expression darkened. "The sheriff is eager to participate. Yes, he has his own reasons for wanting to cause you trouble, I suspect." The loaded statement hung in the air. Eliza glanced at Noah, wondering what history lay between him and the sheriff, but his face revealed nothing. "How many will come?" he asked instead. "Half a dozen, perhaps," Martha estimated. "Your father, the sheriff, Thomas Wright, the Miller brothers from the sawmill, maybe a few others. Not the whole town, certainly. Many disapprove of how he handled things with you, Eliza, even if they don't say so openly." Eliza was surprised by this. She had assumed the entire town supported her father's position. "Really?" Martha's face softened. "Your father's influence has been waning for some time. His treatment of you, public shaming threats of sending you away, it didn't sit well with many. There are whispers about Abigail, too." "What kind of whispers?" Eliza asked, suddenly alert. "That her death wasn't as simple as a fever," Martha said carefully. "That her marriage to Wright was troubled." "It's true," Eliza said. "Abigail wrote to me in secret. Thomas was cruel to her, and when she went to father for help, he told her to be a more obedient wife. But I never knew if anyone else suspected." Martha closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features. "I feared as much. I saw the bruises she tried to hide when she came to church. I should have done more." "You couldn't have known," Eliza said, though the words felt hollow. "How many had suspected Abigail's suffering and remained silent?" "I knew enough," Martha countered. "But like so many in Salvation Creek, I minded my own business when I should have minded hers." She looked at Eliza intently. "I won't make the same mistake twice. That's why I'm here." "What do you suggest we do?" Noah asked. "Eliza can't travel far in her condition, especially not in this weather." Martha considered for a moment. "They won't come until the trails are clearer, which gives us some time. When they do come, you have two options. As I see it, stand your ground or hide." "I won't hide," Eliza said firmly. "I've done nothing wrong." "Nor have I," Noah added. "But I won't put Eliza at risk unnecessarily." Martha nodded, as if their responses confirmed something she already knew. "Then you'll need allies, people who will speak for you, stand with you if necessary." "Who would risk my father's displeasure?" Eliza asked skeptically. "More than you might think," Martha replied. "Dr. Powell, for one. He's been questioning your father's version of events openly." And there are others who remember Abigail, who have daughters of their own, who understand that what happened to you could happen to them. The idea that there might be support for her in Salvation Creek was both surprising and heartening. Eliza had felt so alone in her shame, so isolated in her defiance. There's something else you should know. Martha continued, her expression growing more serious. Daniel Cooper has returned to town. Eliza's heart stuttered at the name. Daniel, the charming son of the former mayor, the man who had courted her in secret, who had promised to marry her once he'd established himself in business, who had left town abruptly just as she discovered she was carrying his child. Daniel, she repeated, her voice faint. Why would he come back now? His father is ill, Martha explained. Consumption. The doctors in Helena give him little time. Daniel has returned to settle his affairs. Eliza felt dizzy with the implications. Daniel was back. The father of her child, the man who had abandoned her to face disgrace alone. Does he know about... She couldn't finish the question, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. I don't believe so, Martha said. Your father has been careful to control the narrative. Most in town believe you were led astray by a passing stranger, not by the former mayor's son. Of course, her father would never admit that his daughter had been compromised by someone of Daniel's standing. Better to imply she had fallen victim to some nameless drifter than acknowledge the entanglement with a respected family. Will he stay long? Eliza asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Until his father passes at least, Martha replied. Perhaps longer. There's talk he might take over his father's business interests. The news unsettled Eliza more than she wanted to admit. She had made her peace with Daniel's absence, had stopped hoping for his return or support. Now his reappearance threatened to reopen wounds she thought had scarred over. Noah had been silent during this exchange, but Eliza could feel his attention, his careful observation of her reactions. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. Thank you for bringing this information, Martha. We're in your debt. Martha waved away his thanks. I owed it to Abigail, she said simply, and to Eliza. She rose from her chair. I should start back before it gets any later. The trail is difficult enough in daylight. Stay the night, Noah offered. It's too dangerous to travel in the dark. Martha hesitated, clearly torn between concern for her safety and worry about propriety. What would people say? She asked with a wry smile that suggested she already knew. They're already saying worse, Noah pointed out. One more scandal hardly matters. His dry humor surprised a laugh from Martha. True enough, she glanced at Eliza. If you don't mind the company, I'd welcome it, Eliza said honestly. The prospect of another woman's presence, especially one who seemed genuinely concerned for her welfare, was comforting. It was settled quickly after that. Martha would stay in Eliza's room while Eliza would take the sofa near the fire, easier for her in her condition, anyway, she assured them. Noah would remain in the loft as usual. As he prepared to climb the ladder that night, leaving the two women by the fire, Noah paused. Eliza, he said, his voice low, about Daniel Cooper. Eliza looked up, surprised by the hesitation in his tone. If he's the father of your child, he has responsibilities, Noah continued, but that doesn't mean you owe him anything. Remember that. Before she could respond, he ascended to the loft, leaving her to consider his words. There was something protective in them, something that warmed her despite the complications Martha's news had introduced. Once Noah was out of earshot, Martha leaned closer to Eliza. He cares for you, she observed quietly. Eliza felt her cheeks warm. He's been kind to me when few others would be. It's more than kindness, Martha insisted. I've known Noah Blackwood for 7 years. He's a good man, but a solitary one. I've never seen him open his home to anyone before you. Eliza didn't know how to respond to that. She had been so focused on her immediate problems, her pregnancy, her father's rejection, the looming birth, that she hadn't allowed herself to consider what Noah's unusual generosity might mean, or what her own growing attachment to him might signify. It's not like that, she finally said. He's helping me because it's right, not because of any personal feelings. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she asked, what will you do about Daniel? The question caught Eliza off guard, though she should have expected it. I don't know, she admitted. I never thought I'd see him again. Do you still love him? Martha asked gently. Did she? Eliza tried to summon the feelings that had once consumed her, the excitement of their secret meetings, The thrill of his promises, the devastation of his departure. All of it seemed distant now, like a story that had happened to someone else. I don't think I ever really knew to know him, she said finally. I was so eager to escape my father's house that I convinced myself Daniel was the answer to my prayers. I saw what I wanted to see. Martha nodded, understanding in her eyes. Youth makes fools of us all, she said without judgment. But you have choices now that you didn't have before. Remember that. Choices. The word hung in the air between them. For so long, Eliza had felt trapped by her father's expectations, by Daniel's abandonment, by her own body's transformation. The idea that she had agency, that she could determine her own path forward, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I just want my child to be safe, she said, to be loved. Everything else is secondary. Martha reached over and squeezed her hand. Then that's your compass. Let it guide your decisions. They talked late into the night, Martha sharing stories of her own life, her observations of Salvation Creek over the decades. Eliza found herself drawn to the older woman's quiet wisdom, her clear-eyed view of human nature, her subtle humor. Why did you really come? Eliza asked as the fire burned low. It can't just be because of Abigail. Martha was silent for a long moment, staring into the embers. I knew your mother, she said finally. We were friends before she married your father. She was vibrant, full of dreams. Isaiah changed after her death hardened. The man who shamed you in the town square isn't the same man she loved. Eliza had few memories of her mother, who had died when she was only 4. To hear her described as vibrant, as a woman with dreams, was like being given a precious gift. What was she like? She asked eagerly. My father rarely speaks of her. Elizabeth was sunshine. Martha said, a fond smile softening her features. Quick to laugh, quicker to forgive. She had a way of seeing the best in people that made them want to live up to her vision. When she sang in church, even the birds outside would fall silent to listen. Eliza's throat tightened with emotion. Did she love him, my father? Deeply, Martha confirmed, and he adored her. That's what makes his transformation so tragic. Grief can warp a person, Eliza. It can turn love into its opposite if we're not careful. The insight struck Eliza forcefully. Her father, once capable of love, had let grief transform him into someone rigid and unforgiving. Noah, facing similar loss, had withdrawn from the world, but retained his capacity for compassion. 2 men, 2 griefs, 2 vastly different responses. Thank you, Eliza whispered, for telling me about her, for remembering. Martha squeezed her hand again. She would be proud of you, Eliza. Never doubt that. As they prepared for sleep, Eliza's mind whirled with all she had learned about her mother, about the town's divided loyalties, about Daniel's return. But most of all, she thought about choices, about the possibility that her future wasn't as constrained as she had believed. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, Eliza allowed herself to imagine a life beyond survival, a life where she might find not just safety but joy, not just shelter but home. The dying fire cast a warm glow over the chapel's interior. Outside, snow continued to fall, each flake a tiny crystal in the moonlight. Eliza's hand moved to her belly, feeling the child stir within. We'll be all right, she whispered, and for the first time she almost believed it. Later that night, when Martha was asleep and the fire had burned down to embers, Eliza rose quietly from the sofa. She couldn't sleep, her mind too full of the day's revelations. Moving carefully in the darkness, she made her way to the far corner of the chapel, where an old upright piano stood, its wood gleaming faintly in the dim light. She had noticed it earlier, but hadn't dared to touch it. Now, drawn by some impulse she couldn't name, she lifted the cover and pressed a key, wincing at the soft note that broke the night's silence. For a moment she paused, listening for any sign that she had disturbed Noah or Martha. Hearing nothing, she pressed another key, then another, picking out the simple melody of a lullaby her mother had sung to her long ago. The music rose in the darkness, a fragile thread of sound that seemed to weave through the converted chapel like a living thing. Eliza didn't sing. She didn't trust her voice not to break, but she let her fingers find the notes, memories guiding them more than skill. She was so absorbed in the music that she didn't hear Noah's approach until he spoke. Your mother taught you. Eliza's hand stilled on the keys. She turned to find him standing a few feet away, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders against the night's chill. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't, Noah assured her. I don't sleep much these nights. He nodded toward the piano. Please don't stop on my account. Eliza hesitated, suddenly self-conscious. I barely remember the tune. She used to sing it to me before bed. It's beautiful, Noah said simply. He moved closer, sitting on the bench beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. May I? When Eliza nodded, he placed his hands on the keys and began to play. Not her halting melody, but a fuller version, the harmony supporting the simple tune she had been picking out. His fingers moved with surprising grace for such large hands. I know this song, he said softly as he played. It's an old folk tune. My mother sang it too. The music filled the chapel richer, now more complete. Eliza watched Noah's face as he played, noticing how the usual lines of tension around his eyes softened, how his expression became almost peaceful. This was the first time she had seen him truly unguarded. In that moment, she glimpsed the man he might have been before loss and war had shaped him into the solitary figure who had rescued her. Without conscious thought, Eliza began to hum along, her voice joining the piano's notes. The melody wound around them, creating a small world of sound in the darkness. When the song ended, neither of them spoke immediately, unwilling to break the spell that had settled over them. I didn't know you played, Eliza said finally. I haven't in years, Noah admitted, not since Clara. Your wife liked music. A small smile touched Noah's lips. She loved it. She was the church pianist when we met. That's her instrument, actually. I brought it west with me, though I couldn't bring myself to play it until now. Eliza was moved by the admission, by the trust it implied. Thank you for sharing it with me. Noah nodded, his eyes meeting hers in the dim light. Something passed between them, not romantic, not yet, but a recognition, a connection deeper than words. We should try to sleep, he said after a moment. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Eliza knew he was right, but she was reluctant to end this moment of peace, this fragile connection formed through music in the night. Noah, she began, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that she needed to say something. Yes? I'm glad it was you, she said finally. In the town square today. I'm glad it was you who helped me. Noah's expression softened further. So am I, Eliza. So am I. As they made their way back to their respective sleeping places, the notes of the lullaby seemed to linger in the air, a promise of connection, of understanding, of something neither of them was ready to name, but both had begun to feel. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in pristine white, erasing the old and making way for the new. Martha Reed departed the next morning after breakfast, promising to return with more information when she could. As Noah helped her saddle her horse, Eliza watched from the doorway, one hand supporting her lower back against the persistent ache that had intensified in recent days. Take care of her, Martha said to Noah, her voice pitched low so Eliza couldn't hear. And yourself. Holloway won't have forgotten or forgiven. Noah's expression remained impassive. Some grudges run too deep to heal, he acknowledged. But I won't let his poison touch Eliza or her child. Martha studied him for a moment. You've changed since she came, she observed. There's life in your eyes again. Noah didn't deny it. Safe travels, he said instead, helping her mount. As Martha rode away following the trail they had broken through the snow the previous day, Noah returned to the chapel. He found Eliza at the window watching Martha's diminishing figure. Do you think she's right? Eliza asked without preamble. About my father gathering men to come here. Yes, Noah replied honestly. Your father is not a man who accepts defiance easily. Eliza nodded, having expected this answer. And Daniel, do you think he'll involve himself? Noah considered the question. It depends on his character, he said finally. If he's honorable, he'll acknowledge his responsibility. He's not, Eliza said quietly. If he were, he wouldn't have left without a word when I told him about the baby. The admission cost her, Noah could see that. Whatever her feelings for Daniel Cooper, now she had once loved him enough to risk everything. People can surprise you, he offered, not wanting to extinguish whatever small hopes she might still harbor. Sometimes for the better. Eliza's smile was sad but clear-eyed, and sometimes they show you exactly who they are if you are willing to see. She turned from the window, one hand cradling her belly. I need to be practical now, for the baby's sake. Noah nodded, respecting her resolve. What do you want to do? Prepare, she said simply. If they come when they come, I want to face them on my terms. No more kneeling in the dirt. No more shame. The quiet dignity in her voice stirred something in Noah's chest. Admiration, certainly, but something more complex as well. In the short time since he'd brought her to the chapel, he'd watched Eliza transform from a frightened young woman into someone steadier, more certain of her own worth. "I'll help you," he promised, "however I can." Eliza's eyes met his gratitude, and something warmer in their depths. "I know," she said softly. "You already have." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Then Eliza winced, her hand pressing more firmly against her belly. "Are you all right?" Noah asked, concern sharpening his voice. "Just the baby moving," she assured him. "It's been restless today." Noah wasn't convinced. "You should rest," he insisted. "You were up late with Martha." Eliza didn't argue, which worried him more than her discomfort. She was typically stubborn about acknowledging her limits. As she settled on the sofa with a blanket, Noah built up the fire, aware of her eyes following his movements. "Noah," she said as he straightened, "there's something I need to ask you." He turned to face her, noting the serious set of her mouth. "What is it?" "Last night when I couldn't sleep, I went upstairs to your loft." She paused, gauging his reaction. "I know I shouldn't have, but I was curious. I wanted to understand you better." Noah tensed but didn't interrupt. "I found a photograph," Eliza continued. "You and Clara, but also," she hesitated, "Sheriff Holloway. You look alike. Are you related?" Noah was silent for a long moment, weighing how much to reveal. He had kept this particular story buried for years, sharing it with no one in Salvation Creek. But Eliza had earned his trust, and with Martha's warning about Holloway's involvement in her father's plans, she deserved to know. "He's my brother," Noah said finally. "Half-brother, to be precise. Same father, different mothers." Eliza's eyes widened. "Your brother? But you have different names at Dedames." "I took my wife's name when we married," Noah explained. "An unusual choice, but Clara was the last of her line. It mattered to her that the Blackwood name continue. And Holloway, that's not our father's name either. Our father was Jonas Briggs, a minister like I became. William, that's Holloway's given name, took our stepmother's name after our father died. There was no love lost between them." "What happened between you?" Eliza asked. "The way he looked at you in town." Noah moved to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. The story was an old one, the wound scarred over, but never fully healed. "We were close once," he said, his voice distant with memory. "Despite the difference in our ages, I'm 10 years older, and the fact that we were raised in different households after our father remarried. William followed me west after the war. He was troubled, had been since childhood. Quick to anger, slow to forgive, but he was family." He paused, gathering the threads of a past he rarely allowed himself to revisit. "I helped him secure the sheriff's position in Salvation Creek, vouched for him with the territorial governor, whom I knew from my chaplain days. I thought the responsibility might steady him." "But it didn't," Eliza guessed. "No," Noah agreed. "It gave him power without the wisdom to wield it properly. I began hearing rumors, bribes taken, excessive force used, justice applied unequally, depending on a person's standing or wealth." He turned back to face Eliza, his expression grave. "I confronted him. It didn't go well. Words were said that can't be unsaid. He accused me of always thinking myself better, more righteous. I accused him of betraying his oath and our father's memory. And that's why he hates you," Eliza concluded, "because you held him accountable." Noah's laugh held no humor. "That's part of it, but the real break came later." He hesitated, then continued. "There was a young woman, a widow with a small farm outside town. William became fixated on her. When she rejected his advances, he began finding reasons to fine her to make her life difficult. I intervened, helped her sell her property and relocate to Oregon, beyond his reach." "He never forgave you," Eliza said, understanding dawning. "No," Noah agreed, "and I never forgave him for abusing his position to harass an innocent woman. We haven't spoken as brothers since, only as sheriff and citizen, and rarely even that." The revelation explains so much: Holloway's hostility, Noah's isolated existence, the undercurrent of tension Eliza had sensed between them in town. "And now he's helping my father," she said, connecting the pieces. "Not just out of duty, but because it gives him a chance to act against you legally." "Most likely," Noah acknowledged. "Your father's moral authority combined with William's legal power makes them dangerous allies." Eliza absorbed this, her hand moving absently over her belly as she thought. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "I know it can't have been easy to share." Noah nodded, oddly relieved to have the story in the open after so long. You deserve to know, especially now. Is there anyone else I should know about? Eliza asked, a hint of wry humor entering her voice. Any other secrets or connections that might become relevant if my father comes calling with his rescue party? The question was partly in jest, but Noah answered seriously. Nothing that would endanger you or the child, he assured her. My past is complicated, Eliza, but I've never hidden anything that would put you at risk. She studied him, her eyes clear and direct. I believe you, she said simply. And the trust implicit in those three words affected Noah more deeply than he could have anticipated. For 7 years, he had lived a solitary existence, avoiding close connections, protecting the rawness that still lingered from Clara's death and his break with his brother. Now this young woman, brave in ways she likely didn't recognize, resilient, despite her wounds, had breached the careful walls he'd constructed around his life and his heart. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. The days that followed fell into a quiet rhythm. Noah taught Eliza how to use his rifle, just in case, he said, though both hoped it would never be necessary. They prepared the chapel for potential visitors, ensuring that supplies were accessible, that paths to the stable and woodpile were kept clear despite the continuing snowfall. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, Noah carving wooden animals that he said would become a mobile for the baby's cradle, Eliza mending or knitting small garments from yarn Martha had brought. Sometimes Noah would play the piano, filling the chapel with melodies that seemed to both mourn and celebrate, while Eliza listened, her hands resting on her growing belly. It was during one such evening, as December deepened toward its middle, that the first snowstorm hit. It began with a gentle whisper against the windows, snowflakes dancing in the firelight, but by midnight had grown into a howling gale that shook the chapel's timbers. Noah rose early to stoke the fires and check on the animals, returning with Frost clinging to his beard and a grim assessment. We're in for a big one, he told Eliza as he stomped snow from his boots. 3 feet already and still coming down. We might be snowed in for days. Eliza nodded, accepting the news with the practical calm she had developed. We have enough food, plenty, Noah assured her, and firewood stacked inside to last a week. We'll be fine. But the we didn't escape her notice, a simple acknowledgement of their shared situation, yet somehow significant. In the weeks since he brought her to the chapel, they had developed a cautious friendship built on small kindnesses and shared silences. But Eliza was acutely aware of how little she truly knew about this man who had risked his reputation and possibly his safety to help her. As the day wore on, the storm intensified. Wind howled around the corners of the chapel, driving snow into drifts that reached the windowsills. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and Eliza found an odd comfort in being cut off from the world. Here in this converted chapel with its books and carved animals, and the haunting notes of the piano that Noah played when he thought she was asleep, she felt safe in a way she hadn't since her mother died. It was more than physical security. It was the sense that she was seen, truly seen, not as Reverend Sullivan's daughter, or Daniel Cooper's discarded lover, or even as an unwed mother, but simply as Eliza. What are you thinking? Noah asked, breaking into her reverie. He sat across from her, a half-carved wooden fox in his hands, his knife paused mid-stroke. About how strange life is, Eliza replied honestly. A month ago, I was planning to run away terrified and alone. Now I'm here still uncertain about the future, but not afraid. Not anymore. Noah studied her face in the firelight. You're stronger than you know, Eliza. You always were. I don't feel strong, she admitted. I feel adrift, as if everything I thought I knew about myself, about the world, has been washed away. That's not weakness, Noah said gently. That's wisdom. Recognizing that life is more complex than we were taught, that people are more complicated than they appear. Even the question slipped out before Eliza could consider it. Noah's hands stilled on the carving. For a moment that she thought she had crossed a line, ventured into territory too painful for him to discuss. But then he set down his knife and met her gaze directly. Especially God, he said quietly. The God I was raised with, the God I preached about during the war, that God was small, contained in verses and doctrines wielded like a weapon. But the God I've come to know since. He hesitated, searching for words. That God is vast, unknowable in the ways that matter, present in the silence between heartbeats. Eliza considered this, finding echoes of her own evolving thoughts. My father's God demands perfection, she said, obedience without question. But that God never answered when Abigail prayed for help, never comforted me when I discovered I was carrying a child alone. Perhaps Noah suggested carefully, it's not God who failed to answer, but men who failed to listen. Men like your father. Men like me. The admission surprised Eliza. How did you fail to listen? Noah's eyes took on that distant look she had come to recognize, the one that meant he was seeing not the chapel's interior, but battlefields, hospitals, graves. I was so certain of what God wanted, what righteousness looked like, he said. I preached comfort to dying boys while shells exploded around us. I assured them of God's plan when their bodies were torn apart by bullets and bayonets. And when Clara wrote that she and Joseph were ill, I prayed instead of going to them. I chose duty over love doctrine, over mercy. The pain in his voice was raw, as if the wound had been inflicted yesterday rather than years ago. Eliza understood then that this was the real reason he had left the ministry, not a loss of faith, but a transformation of it, a breaking and remaking too profound to fit within the confines of the church. You can't know that your presence would have saved them, she said gently. No, Noah agreed, but I can know that in their final moments they were alone. Clara's last letter, his voice caught, her last letter begged me to come home. It arrived after the telegram informing me of their deaths. Without thinking, Eliza rose from her chair and crossed to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. He stiffened at the contact, then relaxed, allowing himself to accept the comfort she offered. I'm sorry, she said, the words inadequate but sincere. I'm so sorry. Noah nodded, covering her hand with his own for a brief moment before drawing away. It was a long time ago, he said, though they both knew that some griefs never truly aged. Outside, the storm raged on, snow and wind battering the chapel as if trying to erase it from the landscape. Inside, something shifted between Eliza and Noah, not a dramatic change but a deepening, a new layer of understanding laid atop the foundation of trust they had begun to build. That night, for the first time since she had come to the chapel, Eliza dreamed not of shame or fear or abandonment, but of music, Noah's hands on the piano keys playing a melody that spoke of both sorrow and hope, and her own voice so long silent joining in harmony. The storm lasted 3 days, bearing the chapel in drifts that reached the windowsills. During that time, Noah and Eliza existed in a strange, suspended state, sharing meals and the warmth of the fire, their conversations venturing into territory neither had expected to explore. Eliza told Noah about her childhood, her earliest memories of her mother, the change in her father after Elizabeth's death, the slow hardening of his heart disguised as religious devotion. She spoke of Abigail, 4 years her senior, who had been her protector and confidant until their father arranged her marriage to Thomas Wright, a widower 20 years her senior, with a reputation for piety and a private taste for cruelty. I knew something was wrong, Eliza said, her voice tight with old guilt. Abigail changed after the wedding. She stopped laughing, stopped singing. When I asked her if she was happy, she would just say that happiness wasn't the purpose of marriage. It wasn't your fault, Noah said, recognizing the self-recrimination in her tone. You were, 14, a child yourself. Old enough to see, Eliza insisted, old enough to speak, but I was afraid of father of challenging what he had ordained. And then she was gone. In turn, Noah shared stories of his own past, his childhood in Pennsylvania, with a stern minister father and a gentle mother who died when he was 12, his years at seminary, his meeting Clara at a church social where she played piano with such joy that he found himself volunteering to turn pages just to be near her, their early marriage and the birth of Joseph, his call to serve as a chaplain when the war began. Clara supported my decision, he said. She believed in the cause, the freedom for all, a nation undivided. But war, he shook his head, war changes how you see everything. Every certainty becomes a question. Every answer reveals 10 more doubts. On the third day, as the storm began to abate and sunlight filtered through the snow-covered windows, Eliza asked the question that had been forming since their conversation about God. Why did you really stop being a minister? Was it just because of Clara and Joseph? Noah was splitting kindling for the morning fire, his movements precise and controlled. He finished the piece he was working on before answering. After they died, I couldn't reconcile the wish I had been preaching with the suffering but had witnessed. Young men torn apart, calling for their mothers, begging for comfort I couldn't honestly provide. He set down the axe and brushed wood shavings from his hands. At Gettysburg, I stood among the bodies of thousands of men and tried to pray. Nothing came. Not grief, not rage, not even doubt, just emptiness. Eliza could almost see it, the battlefield strewn with bodies, a solitary chaplain standing among them, his faith unraveling thread by thread. "So you left the ministry," she concluded. "I finished my service," he corrected. "Then I left everything. Came west. Found this place by accident, a forgotten chapel in a valley few people visited. It seemed appropriate." "But you kept the chapel," Eliza observed. "You didn't tear it down." A faint smile touched his lips. "Some habits are hard to break. And despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to destroy a place built for worship, even if I no longer knew how to participate in it." Eliza considered this as she threaded her needle through worn cotton. "Do you still believe in God?" she asked finally. Noah was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "I believe in something," he said, "not a vengeful deity who demands blind obedience and punishes doubt. Not the God your father preaches, but something larger than ourselves, something that values mercy over sacrifice." He looked at her directly. "What about you, Eliza? After everything your father has done in God's name, do you still believe?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked about her faith. It had always been assumed, prescribed, and forced. "I don't know," she admitted. "I believe in goodness and kindness, in the sort of love that doesn't demand perfection." Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the child shift within. "I believe this baby deserves better than shame." Noah nodded. "That's faith enough for anyone." The simple acceptance in his words loosened something tight in Eliza's chest. Here was understanding without judgment, space to question without fear of retribution. "My father would say, 'We're both bound for hell,'" she said, a hint of dark humor in her voice. "Your father has confused certainty with faith," Noah replied. "They're not the same thing." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Eliza shivered, not from cold, but from the realization of how different this conversation was from any she'd ever had about religion. Her father's faith was all sharp edges and rigid boundaries. Noah's, whatever remained of it, seemed worn smooth like river stones, shaped by loss and doubt, but no less real for its transformations. "I should check on the animals before the wind picks up further," Noah said, rising from his chair. "They get restless when the storm changes." Eliza nodded, watching as he pulled on his heavy coat and lit a lantern. "Be careful," she said. He paused at the door, something unreadable crossing his face at her concern. Then he nodded once and stepped out into the gathering darkness. Alone in the chapel's main room, Eliza set aside her mending and stood stretching her back against the persistent ache that accompanied these late months of pregnancy. She wandered to the bookshelves, scanning the titles by lamplight. Among the theological texts and history volumes, she spotted a small, worn Bible. Curious, she pulled it from the shelf. It fell open naturally to Psalm 23, the page marked by a faded ribbon. In the margin, in precise handwriting, were the words, "For Clara and Joseph, until we meet again." Eliza's throat tightened. She carefully closed the Bible and returned it to its place, feeling as though she had glimpsed something deeply private. Her gaze drifted to the ladder leading to the loft, Noah's personal space, which she had never entered, except for that one intrusion. The wind howled outside, and Eliza found herself drawn to the ladder, curiosity overcoming propriety. She climbed carefully, one hand supporting her belly, until she could see over the edge of the loft floor. It was a simple space, a bed with a quilt similar to the one on her own, a trunk at its foot, a small table with a lamp, and a few books. Nothing unusual or revealing. Then she noticed a wooden box tucked beneath the bed, its lid slightly ajar. Even from the ladder, she could see the edge of what appeared to be a baby's blanket. Eliza hesitated, knowing she should descend, should respect Noah's privacy. But something about that glimpse of soft fabric pulled her forward. She climbed the remaining rungs and crossed to the bed, kneeling awkwardly beside it. The box was plain, but beautifully crafted, its corners dovetailed, its surface polished by years of handling. With trembling fingers, Eliza lifted the lid fully. Inside lay a carefully folded baby blanket, faded blue, with the initials JB embroidered in one corner. Joseph Briggs, she presumed Noah had taken his wife's surname, but his son had carried the family name. Beneath the blanket was a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, addressed to Clara, in the same precise handwriting she'd seen in the Bible. Eliza knew she should stop, should close the box, and return to the main room before Noah came back. This was an invasion, a trespass into the most private corners of his grief. But a photograph lying beneath the letters caught her eye. A portrait of a young woman with solemn eyes and a determined set to her mouth. Clara unmistakably. But this was a different image than the one displayed in the main room. In this one, Clara wasn't alone. A man stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, his face serious beneath a clerical collar. Noah much younger without the lines that now marked his face or the silver threading his beard. But it wasn't the youthfulness that arrested Eliza's attention. It was the man standing on Clara's other side, a younger Sheriff Holloway, his resemblance to Noah unmistakable despite his scowling expression. Eliza's breath caught. There was more to the brothers' story than Noah had shared clearly. The way they flanked Clara in the photograph, Noah protective, Holloway possessive, it suggested complications Noah hadn't mentioned. The sound of the door opening below startled her from her thoughts. Hastily, she closed the box and pushed it back under the bed, then moved to the ladder as quickly as her condition would allow. She was halfway down when Noah looked up and saw her. His expression shifted from surprise to something harder to read. "Eliza?" he questioned. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, continuing her descent. "I shouldn't have. I was curious. It was wrong of me." He helped her down the last few rungs, his touch impersonal, steadying. His expression remained carefully neutral. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked. The question wasn't accusatory, which somehow made it worse. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I wasn't looking for anything specific," she admitted. I wanted to understand you better." Noah considered her for a long moment. "Understanding comes through conversation, Eliza, not through searching through private things." "I know," she said, shame washing over her. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, accepting her apology without further comment. "The storm's picking up again," he said, changing the subject. "We might be snowed in for a day or two more." Eliza welcomed the shift in topic, though she couldn't forget what she'd seen. The photograph with Holloway nagged at her, raising questions she wasn't sure how to ask. "Is there enough firewood?" she asked instead. "Plenty," he assured her, "and food enough for weeks. We'll be fine." The "we" didn't escape her notice this time either, a simple acknowledgement of their shared situation, yet somehow significant. In the weeks since he'd brought her to the chapel, they had developed a cautious friendship built on small kindnesses and shared silences. But Eliza was acutely aware of how little she truly knew about this man who had risked his reputation and possibly his safety to help her. That night, as the storm raged outside, Eliza lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind's howl and the occasional creak of the chapel's timbers. The image of the photograph wouldn't leave her mind, Noah and Clara, so young and serious, and Holloway with his unmistakable resentment. There was a story there, one Noah hadn't shared. Given the animosity the sheriff had shown toward him in town, it wasn't a happy one. Eliza's hand moved to her belly, feeling the child shift restlessly within. "What secrets are we living among us, little one?" she whispered. No answer came save the wind's mournful cry and the soft settling of snow against the window. The following morning brought no abatement to the storm. If anything, it had intensified during the night, snow now completely covering the lower windows of the chapel. Noah spent the early hours digging paths to the stable and woodpile, returning covered in snow, but satisfied that the animals were comfortable and supplied. Inside, Eliza tried to focus on practical matters, making bread, mending a tear in Noah's shirt, organizing the small collection of baby clothes she had managed to sew from scraps of fabric. But her mind kept returning to the photograph and what it might mean. When Noah came in from his final check on the animal, stomping snow from his boots and hanging his coat by the door, Eliza made a decision. No more secrets, no more wondering. If they were to face her father and Holloway together, she needed to understand what she might be walking into. "Noah," she said as he warmed his hands by the fire, "there's something else in that photograph I found. Something you didn't tell me about." He stilled his back to her. "What?" "Sheriff Holloway was in the picture with you and Clara," Eliza said quietly. "He looked angry." Noah turned slowly to face her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing, and Eliza feared she had damaged the fragile trust between them. Then he sighed, a sound so heavy with old sorrow that it seemed to fill the chapel. "William was in love with Clara," he said simply, "or thought he was. They grew up in the same town, attended the same church. When I came home from seminary, Clara was playing piano for the services. William assumed He trailed off, his gaze distant. He never forgave either of us for her choice. When we married, he refused to attend the wedding. When Joseph was born, he didn't acknowledge him as his nephew. And during the war, Eliza prompted gently, when Clara and Joseph were ill. Noah's face tightened. William had been declared unfit for service, a heart murmur. He stayed in our hometown while I went to the front. When Clara wrote that she and Joseph were sick, she sent letters to both of us. Mine never arrived until after. He swallowed hard. William received his. He could have gone to them, could have helped, but he didn't. How do you know? Eliza asked. Clara's final letter mentioned it, Noah said. She wrote that she had begged William to fetch the doctor from the next town when ours fell ill with the same fever. He promised to go, but never did. She wrote that he visited once, told her it was God's judgment for choosing the wrong brother. The cruelty of it struck Eliza like a physical blow. To use someone's suffering as vindication for rejected feelings, it was monstrous. That's why you really came west, she said, understanding dawning. Not just to escape memories, but to escape him. Noah nodded. After I received Clara's final letter, I confronted William. He denied everything, claimed Clara was delirious when she wrote it. But I knew he had let them die. And now he's sheriff here, Eliza said, the implications clear, with power over people's lives. Yes, Noah agreed grimly. When I discovered he had followed me west, taken the position here, I considered leaving. But this had become my home, and I thought foolishly perhaps that I could serve as some check on his authority. Instead, we've been locked in a silent war for 7 years, neither willing to leave, neither willing to reconcile. The revelation cast Holloway's eagerness to join her father's rescue party in an even darker light. This wasn't just about enforcing the moral code of Salvation Creek. It was personal vengeance cloaked in legal authority. I'm sorry, Eliza said softly, for prying, for making you relive this. Noah's expression softened slightly. You needed to know. If Holloway comes with your father, he won't be impartial. He'll use any opportunity to cause me harm. And me, Eliza asked. My child. Collateral damage in his mind, Noah said bluntly. Not targets themselves, but acceptable losses in his campaign against me. The thought sent a chill through Eliza that had nothing to do with the howling wind outside. She wrapped her arms protectively around her belly, as if she could shield her unborn child from the hatred of a man she barely knew. Noah crossed the room and knelt before her chair, his eyes level with hers. I won't let him hurt you, Eliza, he said, his voice low and intense. Or your child. I swear it. In that moment, looking into his eyes, Eliza believed him completely. Whatever came her father, Holloway Daniel, the birth, she would not face it alone. The realization both comforted and terrified her, for she recognized that Noah's protection came at a cost to him. He was reopening old wounds, confronting ghosts he had tried to lay to rest, and all for her sake. Why, she asked the question barely above a whisper, why risk so much for me? Noah considered his answer carefully. Because everyone deserves the chance to choose their own path, he said finally. Because what your father tried to do to you was wrong. Because, he paused, then continued more softly. Because you remind me that even in the darkest times, there can be light, hope. It wasn't the whole truth. Eliza could see that in his eyes. There was more. He wasn't ready to say more than either of them was ready to acknowledge. But it was enough for now, enough to sustain them through the storm and whatever lay beyond. Thank you, she said simply. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling around the corners of the converted chapel. Inside, the fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls, and in the quiet space between them, two wounded souls found an unexpected comfort in each other's presence, a fragile peace that both knew might soon be tested. Eliza's hand moved to her belly as the baby shifted within her. Whatever came her father, the sheriff, machine the birth, she would face it with a strength she hadn't known she possessed until Noah Blackwood had offered his hand to a kneeling woman in the dust of Salvation Creek. One day at a time, she murmured, echoing his words from weeks ago. Noah nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. One day at a time. The world beyond the chapel windows was a study in white and gray, the snow-covered landscape broken only by the dark silhouettes of pine trees and the occasional track of deer or rabbit. A week had passed since the storm, bringing them deeper into December. The trails to town had cleared enough for travel, though the journey remained challenging. Eliza stood at the window, one hand pressed against her lower back, the other cradling her belly. The baby had been particularly active since dawn, shifting and turning as if preparing for something. Dr. Powell had estimated late January for the birth, but Eliza sensed it might come sooner. Her body felt different somehow, heavier, more unwieldy, with occasional twinges that made her catch her breath. Behind her, Noah was preparing for a trip to town. They needed supplies, and more urgently, they needed information. How far had her father progressed with his plans? Had Daniel inquired about her? Was Dr. Powell willing to attend the birth? "You don't have to go," Eliza said, turning from the window. "We have enough food to last another week." Noah looked up from checking his saddlebags. "We need to know what we're facing," he replied. "And I want to speak with Powell about your delivery. You said yourself the baby seems more active." Eliza couldn't argue with his logic, but anxiety knotted in her stomach at the thought of him riding into what might be hostile territory. "What if they detain you? My father and Holloway." "On what grounds?" Noah asked reasonably. "I've broken no laws." "Since when has Holloway needed legal grounds to cause trouble?" Eliza countered, remembering what Noah had told her about his half-brother's abuse of power. A shadow crossed Noah's face. "You have a point," he conceded, "but I'll be careful. Go to Powell first, then the general store. I won't linger." Eliza nodded, trying to suppress her worry. In the weeks since he'd brought her to the chapel, Noah had become essential to her sense of security. The thought of him facing her father's wrath or Holloway's vindictiveness made her heart clench with fear. "Here," Noah said, crossing to a cabinet near the fireplace. He removed a revolver, checked that it was loaded, then offered it to Eliza. "Do you know how to use this?" Eliza stared at the weapon, hesitant. "My father never allowed guns in our home," she said. "He said they were instruments of violence, not protection." "They're tools," Noah said simply, "neither good nor evil on their own. This one is well-maintained and reliable." He showed her how to hold it, how to aim, how to squeeze rather than to pull the trigger. "I don't expect trouble while I'm gone," he assured her, "but I'd feel better knowing you have this." Eliza took the revolver, surprised by its weight. "I pray I won't need it," she said quietly. "As do I," Noah agreed. He hesitated, then added, "If I'm not back by nightfall, bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Powell." The instruction sent a chill through Eliza. "You're frightening me," she admitted. Noah's expression softened. "I'm being cautious, that's all. I fully intend to return before dark with supplies and information." He managed a small smile. "And perhaps some of that peppermint candy you mentioned liking." The attempt at lightness eased Eliza's tension slightly. She watched as he donned his heavy coat and gloves, tucking his hat firmly onto his head. "Be careful," she said as he moved to the door. Noah paused, looking back at her. For a moment, something unspoken hung in the air between them, words considered but not voiced, feelings acknowledged but not declared. "I will," he promised, and then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Alone in the chapel, Eliza set the revolver on the mantel and tried to focus on practical tasks. She kneaded dough for bread, swept the already clean floor, reorganized the baby clothes she had sewn from Noah's old shirts. But her mind kept returning to the dangers he might face in town. What if her father had convinced others that Noah had abducted? What if Holloway used his authority as sheriff to arrest him on some trumped-up charge? What if Daniel was there ready to assert his claim to the child she carried? Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Eliza paused in her nervous tidying, one hand moving to her belly as a sharper pain than before gripped her lower back. She breathed through it, counting seconds until it eased. "Not yet," she murmured to the child within. "Your father isn't here. Wait a little longer." The irony of her words struck her immediately. She wasn't referring to Daniel Cooper, the man whose seed had quickened in her womb. She was thinking of Noah, the man who had offered shelter and kindness, who had treated her with dignity when others had only shame to give. What did that mean? Eliza wasn't certain. She only knew that the thought of facing childbirth without Noah nearby filled her with dread deeper than any physical pain could cause. The hours passed slowly. Eliza put the bread in the oven, ate a light meal, and tried to rest as the afternoon light began to fade. The pains in her back came and went, never settling into a regular pattern, but persistent enough to concern her. As dusk approached, she found herself returning to the window again and again, searching the trail for any sign of Noah's return. The forest shadows lengthened the snow, taking on a blue cast in the fading light. Still no rider appeared on the path. Eliza tried to remain calm, reminding herself that trips to town often took longer than expected. Noah might have had to wait for Powell, or the store might have been busy. Perhaps the trail was more difficult than they'd anticipated. But as true darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the clear winter sky, her worry deepened into fear. Noah had promised to return before nightfall. He was a man who kept his promises. Following his instructions, Eliza barred the door, banking the fire so it would burn steadily through the night. She kept the revolver close at hand as she settled into the rocking chair, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Please come back," she whispered into the quiet of the chapel. "Please be safe." Outside, an owl called its mournful cry, echoing through the winter stillness. Eliza closed her eyes, offering a prayer, not to her father's stern God, but to whatever gentler divinity might be listening. She must have dozed despite her anxiety, for she startled awake to the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Disoriented, she fumbled for the revolver, her heart racing as she tried to determine how much time had passed. The fire had burned low, suggesting she had slept for at least an hour. Outside, the night was fully dark, the moon casting silver light across the snow, and someone was definitely approaching the chapel. Eliza moved to the window, staying to one side to avoid being silhouetted against the interior light. A single rider was making his way up the trail, his figure familiar even in the dim moonlight. Noah. Relief washed over her, so intense it made her knees weak. She hurried to unbar the door, throwing it open as he dismounted. "Thank God," she breathed. "I was so worried." Noah's face was grim as he led his horse to the stable. "Bar the door again," he instructed. "I'll be in shortly." Something in his tone sent a fresh wave of apprehension through Eliza. She did as he asked, securing the door before stoking the fire to cast more light into the room. When Noah entered a few minutes later, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his mouth. "What happened?" she asked. "Are you hurt?" "No," he assured her, removing his coat and hanging it by the door. "But we have trouble coming." Eliza sank into the rocking chair, her hand automatically moving to her belly. "Tell me." Noah paced the length of the room before answering, as if trying to organize his thoughts. "Your father has convinced the town council that you're being held against your will," he said finally. "He's obtained a letter from Judge Cooper authorizing the sheriff to investigate and, if necessary, rescue you." "Judge Cooper?" Eliza repeated, confused. "Daniel's father." "Yes, despite his illness, he's still the legal authority in Salvation Creek. And your father presented compelling evidence, or what appeared to be evidence, a letter supposedly from you begging for help." "A forgery," Eliza said immediately. "I've written nothing of the sort." "Of course," Noah agreed. "But it was convincing enough, especially with Sheriff Holloway supporting your father's claims." Eliza felt sick with the realization of how thoroughly her father had manipulated the situation. "When will they come?" "Tomorrow," Noah replied. "A party of 6 men, your father Holloway, the Miller brothers, Thomas Wright, and Daniel Cooper." The last name hit Eliza like a physical blow. "Daniel, he's part of this," Noah's expression darkened. "Apparently he's quite concerned about the welfare of his poor, misguided former sweetheart and her child." The bitterness in his tone told Eliza all she needed to know about how Daniel was presenting himself to the town, not as the man who had abandoned her, but as a concerned father seeking to protect his offspring. "Did you see him?" she asked. "Yes," Noah said. "He approached me in town, asked about you, said he'd been shocked to learn of your condition upon his return." His mouth twisted. "He claimed he'd always intended to come back for you, that his sudden departure was due to urgent family business." "Lies," Eliza whispered. "He left because he didn't want the responsibility. He told me as much before he disappeared." Noah nodded, unsurprised. "I thought as much, but he's presenting a different story now, one that casts him as the wrong party, separated from his beloved by circumstance rather than choice." "And people believe him?" Eliza asked, though she already knew the answer. Daniel Cooper had always been charming, his handsome face and easy manner, winning trust easily. "Some do," Noah confirmed. "Others are more skeptical. But with your father's moral authority behind him and the judge's letter giving legal weight to their cause." He left the sentence unfinished. Eliza absorbed this, her mind racing. "What about Dr. Powell? Did you speak with him?" "Briefly," Noah said. "He's concerned about the turn of events, but feels powerless to intervene officially. However, he gave me this." He removed a small package from his saddlebag. Supplies for the birth and instructions. He said he'd try to be present if possible, but he can't promise, Eliza finished. Another pain gripped her lower back stronger than before, and she couldn't suppress a small gasp. Noah was at her side, immediately kneeling beside the rocking chair. Eliza, what is it? Just discomfort, she said, breathing through the pain. The baby is restless tonight. Noah studied her face, concern evident in his eyes. How long have you been having pains? On and off all day, she admitted. But they're not regular. It's probably just false labor. Or early labor, Noah countered. Powell warned this might happen. Stress can bring on contractions. The possibility that the baby might come now with danger approaching and no medical help available filled Eliza with fresh fear. It's too soon, she protested. Powell said late January. Babies come when they decide to, Noah said with gentle pragmatism. And Powell said you were further along than he initially thought. Another pain seized Eliza, this one sharper, more defined. She clutched the arms of the rocking chair, her knuckles whitening as she breathed through it. That's not false labor, Noah said when she relaxed again. We need to prepare for the possibility that the baby might come tonight. The reality of the situation crashed over Eliza. She might give birth here in this converted chapel with only Noah to help her. And tomorrow, while she was at her most vulnerable, her father and Holloway would arrive with legal authority to take her away. I'm afraid, she whispered. Noah's hand covered hers, warm and steady. I know, he said simply. But you're not alone, Eliza. I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. The quiet certainty in his voice steadied her. Whatever came, labor, birth, confrontation, she would face it with this man beside her, this unlikely protector who had become so much more. What do we do? She asked. First, we make you comfortable, Noah said, rising to his feet. Then we wait to see if the contractions establish a pattern. If they do, we prepare for birth. If not, we rest and conserve our strength for tomorrow. His calm practicality anchored Eliza, giving her something to focus on beyond her fear. She nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. The next few hours passed in a strange, suspended state. The contractions continued, gradually becoming more regular and intense. Noah moved with quiet efficiency, heating water, preparing clean linens, rearranging the main room, to give Eliza space to move as her body directed. How do you know what to do? Eliza asked during a respite between pains, genuinely curious about his apparent knowledge of childbirth. I told you I've delivered foals and calves, he reminded her. But also during the war, I assisted field surgeons. And he hesitated. I was present when Clara went into labor with Joseph. Things went wrong quickly, but the midwife showed me what to do, how to help before the doctor arrived. The admission cost him. Eliza could see that. These were memories he rarely revisited, wounds still tender despite the passing years. I'm sorry, she said, understanding the courage it took for him to help her now, to face what must be painful echoes of his greatest loss. Don't be, he replied, his voice gentle. Some memories, though painful, are also sacred. Another contraction gripped Eliza stronger than any before. She moved instinctively, leaning forward against the table, swaying slightly as the pain built and receded. They're getting closer together, Noah observed when she could speak again. And stronger. Eliza nodded, a mixture of fear and determination settling over her. The baby is coming tonight, she said with certainty. I can feel it. Noah didn't question her instinct. Then we'll meet this child under the same stars that have watched over this valley for centuries, he said. A good beginning, I think. His quiet confidence bolstered Eliza's courage. If Noah believed she could do this, then perhaps she could. As another contraction began to build, she found herself humming a low, wordless melody that seemed to rise from some deep primal place within her. Noah recognized the tune, an old hymn one he had sung countless times in his days as a minister. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here in a former chapel, a woman named Eliza was bringing new life into the world while humming a hymn of salvation. Perhaps there was divine poetry in it, a meaning beyond coincidence. As the night deepened, Eliza's labor progressed steadily. She moved between positions, walking, kneeling, leaning against Noah's solid frame, when the pains became too intense to bear alone. He supported her without hesitation, offering strength when she faltered, encouragement when she doubted. Outside, the moon tracked across the star-filled sky, casting shifting patterns of silver light through the windows. Inside, the fire burned steadily, warming the room where a woman labored to bring forth life. Near midnight, Eliza's water broke, soaking her nightgown and the blankets Noah had spread beneath her. The contractions intensified after that, coming in waves that left her gasping and disoriented. "You're doing wonderfully," Noah assured her, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "Your body knows what to do. Trust it." Eliza clung to his words, to the anchor of his presence. When the urge to push became overwhelming, she followed it, bearing down with all her strength as nature's oldest imperative took over. "I can see the head," Noah told her, his voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstance. "Dark hair like yours. One more push, Eliza. One more." Gathering her remaining strength, Eliza pushed, feeling the burning stretch as her child entered the world. There was a moment of terrible pressure, then sudden release, and a cry, thin but determined, pierced the night. "A girl," Noah said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a daughter, Eliza." He placed the squalling infant on Eliza's chest, covering them both with a clean blanket. Eliza stared down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the perfect miniature fingers that grasped reflexively at the air. "Hello," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one. I'm your mother." The baby's cries quieted as she nestled against Eliza's warmth. Noah moved efficiently, tying off the umbilical cord and cutting it as Powell had instructed, then helping Eliza deliver the afterbirth. Through it all, the infant remained on Eliza's chest, skin to skin, establishing that first crucial bond. When everything was settled, Noah built up the fire and brought Eliza fresh blankets and a cup of tea sweetened with honey. She sipped it gratefully, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. "She's perfect," she murmured. "Absolutely perfect." Noah smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded. "She is," he agreed, "as is her mother." Eliza looked up at him, seeing the emotion he usually kept carefully contained now visible in his eyes. "Thank you," she said, knowing the words were inadequate for what he had given her, safety, dignity, and now assistance in bringing her child into the world. "No thanks needed," he replied simply. "It was an honor to witness such courage." Eliza shifted the baby slightly, wincing at the soreness in her body. "What happens now?" she asked, reality intruding on the perfect moment. "They're still coming tomorrow." Noah's expression sobered. "Yes," he acknowledged, "but circumstances have changed. You've just given birth. No decent doctor would recommend moving you." "My father isn't known for his deference to medical opinion," Eliza pointed out, "especially when it contradicts his wishes." "True," Noah conceded, "but you are no longer alone, Eliza. You have a child to protect now and legal rights as her mother that even your father must acknowledge." Eliza looked down at her daughter sleeping peacefully against her breast. The fierce protectiveness that surged through her was unlike anything she had ever experienced, primal and absolute. "I won't let them take her," she vowed. "Not my father, not Daniel, not anyone." "Nor will I," Noah promised. He hesitated, then said what had been in his heart for weeks. "Eliza, I care for you deeply, more than I thought possible after Clara. If you would consider, there could be a place for you here for both of you. Not just temporary shelter, but a home." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Eliza felt tears spring to her eyes again, but these were different tears of wonder rather than pain or fear. "Noah," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. A sharp knock at the door interrupted her, startling them both. Noah reached for his rifle, moving to the window to see who could be calling at this hour. "It's Powell," he said with surprise, recognizing the doctor's slight figure in the moonlight. He set down the rifle and moved to unbar the door. Dr. Powell entered in a flurry of cold air and urgency, snow dusting his coat and hat. "Thank God you're still here," he said without preamble. "They're coming tonight, not tomorrow. Holloway convinced your father that the element of surprise would be to their advantage." His gaze fell on Eliza and the infant, and his expression shifted from alarm to professional assessment. "I see I'm too late to be of assistance with the birth," he observed. "Mother and child appear well." "Both are doing fine," Noah confirmed. "The baby arrived about an hour ago, a girl." Powell nodded approvingly. "Good work, both of you." He removed his coat and hat, hanging them by the door before approaching Eliza. "May I examine the little one and you as well, to ensure all is as it should be?" Eliza nodded, allowing him to check the baby's breathing and reflexes before gently examining Eliza herself. "Everything appears normal," he declared when he'd finished. The child is small but healthy and you're recovering well. However, you should not be moved for at least a week, preferably 2. Try telling that to my father, Eliza said grimly. How far behind you are they? An hour, perhaps less, Powell replied. I rode ahead when I realized their intentions. Holloway was quite enthusiastic about the prospect of confronting you, Noah. He's armed, as are the others. Noah's jaw tightened. Did Daniel Cooper join them? Yes, Powell confirmed, though he seemed less certain than the rest. Your father has been filling his ear with tales of your delusion and vulnerability to influence. Eliza felt a surge of bitter resentment toward both men, her father for his manipulation, Daniel for his belated and self-serving concern. What do they plan to do? She asked. Take you back to town, Powell said bluntly. Your father wants you under his roof until arrangements can be made for you and the child. Daniel is making noises about doing right by you, though whether that means marriage or simply providing financial support I couldn't say. And Noah, Eliza pressed, what do they intend for him? Powell glanced at Noah, his expression troubled. Holloway has been suggesting that charges might be appropriate. Kidnapping, perhaps, or interference with parental authority. I'm 19, Eliza protested. An adult. My father has no authority over me. Under normal circumstances, yes, Powell agreed. But your father has been painting a picture of you as unstable, vulnerable to suggestion due to your condition. And Holloway is eager to believe the worst of Noah. Noah absorbed this information with a calmness that impressed Eliza. We knew this might happen, he said. What matters now is protecting Eliza and the child. Indeed, Powell agreed, which is why I came ahead to warn you. Yes, but also to serve as a medical witness. As Eliza's physician, I can certify that moving her so soon after childbirth would endanger both her health and the infant's. Will they listen? Eliza asked skeptically. Holloway might not, Powell admitted. But the others, even your father, will hesitate to act against clear medical advice, especially with witnesses present. Thank you, Eliza said, genuinely moved by the doctor's willingness to take a stand on her behalf. Powell shook his head. I should have done more for Abigail, he said, a regret heavy in his voice. I won't make the same mistake twice. The mention of her sister strengthened Eliza's resolve. Abigail had been trapped in a life not of her choosing, forced into submission until despair became her only escape. Eliza would not follow the same path. For herself, for her daughter, for Abigail's memory, she would stand firm. What now? She asked, looking between Powell and Noah. We wait, Noah said simply, and when they arrive, we face them together. As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses broke the night's stillness, not the single set of hoofbeats that had heralded Powell's arrival, but multiple riders moving with purpose up the snow-covered trail. They're here, Powell said, unnecessarily moving to the window to confirm what they all knew. 6 riders as expected. Noah checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded but not yet raising it. Eliza, take the baby and go to your room, he instructed. Powell and I will speak with them first. No, Eliza said firmly, shifting the sleeping infant in her arms. I won't hide. This concerns us more than anyone. I'll be present for whatever happens. Noah studied her face, seeing the determination there. After a moment, he nodded. All right, he agreed, but stay back from the door, and if things turn hostile, you take the baby to safety without argument. Understood. Understood. Eliza confirmed, though she had no intention of leaving Noah to face her father and Holloway alone if violence threatened. Powell positioned himself near Eliza, ready to serve as both medical authority and protective presence. Noah moved to the door, standing tall and composed as the riders dismounted outside. A heavy knock rattled the wooden frame, followed by a familiar voice. Noah Blackwood, this is Sheriff Holloway. Open up in the name of the law. Noah took a deep breath, then unbarred the door, swinging it open to reveal the assembled party. Reverend Isaiah Sullivan stood at the front, his tall figure somehow diminished in the moonlight, his face set in lines of righteous determination. Beside him, Sheriff Holloway rested his hand on his holstered gun, a barely suppressed eagerness in his stance. Behind them stood the others, the Miller brothers, stolid and uncomfortable, Thomas Wright looking smugly self-righteous, and Daniel Cooper handsome even in the harsh winter light, his expression a calculated mixture of concern and resolve. Gentlemen, Noah greeted them with calm civility. This is unexpected at such a late hour. Where is my daughter? Isaiah demanded, attempting to look past Noah into the chapel's interior. Miss Sullivan is here, Noah confirmed, as is Dr. Powell, who was attending to her medical needs. This information seemed to momentarily confuse the Reverend. Powell, what medical needs? Perhaps you should see for yourself, Noah suggested, stepping aside to allow them entry. But I'll ask you to remember that this is my home, and you are here uninvited. I expect civil behavior from all of you. Holloway snorted derisively. You're in no position to set terms, Blackwood. We have legal authority to investigate Miss Sullivan's situation. He patted the document tucked into his coat. Judge Cooper's order. By all means, investigate, Noah replied evenly. You'll find Miss Sullivan is here of her own free will and under no duress save that which childbirth naturally imposes. Childbirth. Daniel stepped forward, suddenly alert. The baby was born approximately 2 hours ago. Powell supplied, moving to stand beside Noah. A healthy girl, though small. Both mother and child are doing well, but neither should be moved for at least a week. This news caused a ripple of reaction through the group. Isaiah's face paled. Holloway looked annoyed at this complication, and Daniel seemed genuinely stunned, as if the reality of his child's birth had finally penetrated the comfortable fiction he had constructed. I want to see her, Isaiah insisted. I want to hear from Eliza herself that she is here willingly. You may enter, Noah said, but I'll ask Sheriff Holloway to leave his weapon outside. There's a newborn child here, and I won't have firearms in her presence. Holloway bristled. I am the law in Salvation Creek. And this is not Salvation Creek, Noah interrupted. This is my property, and you have no jurisdiction here beyond what Judge Cooper's limited order provides: investigation, not armed intervention. The two men locked eyes, years of fraternal enmity crackling between them. For a moment, Eliza feared Holloway would draw his weapon, forcing a confrontation, but Isaiah placed a restraining hand on the sheriff's arm. We'll comply, the Reverend said, for now. Grudgingly, Holloway removed his gun belt, hanging it on a peg outside the door. The others filed in behind him, their movements awkward in the confined space of the chapel's main room. And then they saw Eliza seated in the rocking chair by the fire, her newborn daughter cradled in her arms. The sight stopped them in their tracks, this tableau of new motherhood, peaceful and profound in the firelight. Eliza, Isaiah breathed, taking a step toward his daughter. What has he done to you? Eliza looked up at her father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the towering figure of moral authority she had feared for so long, but a man flawed, broken by grief he had never properly processed, hardened by a faith that had become more prison than comfort. He saved me, Father, she said quietly. When you would have sent me away in shame, Noah offered shelter. When you would have taken my child, he helped me bring her safely into the world. Isaiah shook his head, unwilling to accept her words. You don't know what you're saying. The trauma of childbirth, the influence of this man. I know exactly what I'm saying. Eliza interrupted, her voice steady. I came here willingly. I have stayed willingly, and I will not return with you to Salvation Creek. You have no choice, Holloway interjected. We have legal authority, Isaiah began. To investigate, Powell reminded him, not to remove a woman who has just given birth against medical advice. Daniel stepped forward, then his gaze fixed on the infant in Eliza's arms. The child, my child, he began. Yes, Eliza acknowledged. Your daughter, the one you wanted no part of when I told you I was carrying her. Daniel flushed, conscious of the others watching. I was confused, afraid, he offered lamely. I never meant to abandon you, Eliza. When I learned what had happened in my absence, I was devastated. How convenient, Eliza observed, her tone, making it clear she didn't believe him. And now you've returned, ready to claim a child you previously rejected. I want to do right by you both, Daniel insisted. My father's illness brought me home, but finding you was a blessing in disguise. We could be a family, Eliza. I'm prepared to marry you to give our daughter my name. The offer, no doubt intended to sound generous, struck Eliza as hollow. She looked at Daniel, searching for any trace of the man she had believed she loved. All she saw was calculation and self-interest, thinly veiled as concern. No, she said simply. Daniel blinked, clearly not expecting refusal. No, Eliza, be reasonable. Think of the child. Think of your reputation. I am thinking of my daughter, Eliza replied. And I want more for her than a father who rejected her existence until it became convenient to acknowledge her. As for my reputation, she laughed, the sound surprisingly light. I believe that's beyond salvaging in Salvation Creek, don't you? Isaiah stepped forward, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. You would refuse honorable marriage. You would continue living here in sin with this apostate. There is no sin in seeking safety, Eliza countered, no sin in accepting kindness. Noah has been nothing but honorable, far more so than those who claim the mantle of righteousness. Holloway, who had been watching the exchange with growing impatience, turned to Noah. Enough of this, he snapped. You've poisoned her mind against her family, against proper authority. For that alone, you should face charges. What charges specifically? Noah asked, his tone reasonable despite the provocation. Offering shelter to a woman in need, assisting in the delivery of her child. Please enlighten me about which laws I've broken. Holloway's face darkened. You interfered with a father's rightful authority over his daughter. Eliza is 19, Noah pointed out, an adult by law. Reverend Sullivan has no legal authority over her decisions. She was in a vulnerable state, Isaiah argued, not capable of rational thought. That's a medical determination, Powell interjected. And as her physician, I observed no evidence of mental incapacity then or now. Eliza has been making sound, if difficult, decisions throughout her pregnancy. The discussion was interrupted by a small cry from the infant, who had awakened and was beginning to fuss. Eliza gently rocked her, murmuring, soothing words until the child settled again. The sound seemed to affect Isaiah. He stared at his granddaughter, an unreadable expression crossing his weathered face. May I? He began, then stopped, as if unsure how to continue. Would you like to see your granddaughter? Eliza asked, her voice softening slightly. Isaiah nodded, approaching cautiously. Eliza shifted the blanket to reveal the baby's face, perfect in its newborn serenity, dark lashes against pink cheeks, a wisp of dark hair visible beneath her cap. She looks like your mother, Isaiah said quietly, something raw and vulnerable breaking through his stern facade. The same shape to her eyes. Eliza hadn't expected this moment of genuine emotion from her father, this acknowledgement of a connection to her mother. Does she asked softly. I can barely remember mother's face. Isaiah's throat worked as he swallowed. Elizabeth had the same delicate features, the same determined set to her mouth even as an infant. His hand hovered near the baby, but didn't quite touch her. What will you name her? The question seemed to catch everyone by surprise, including Isaiah himself. It acknowledged a future, a continuing existence for this child beyond the current conflict. Hope, Eliza said without hesitation. Hope Abigail Sullivan. Isaiah's eyes closed briefly at the middle name, his lost daughter's now carried by his granddaughter. When he opened them again, Eliza thought she saw a shimmer of moisture, quickly blinked away. A good name, he acknowledged. Biblical. Fitting. The moment of connection was broken by Holloway's impatient voice. This changes nothing, he insisted. The child needs a proper home, proper upbringing, not a converted chapel in the wilderness with a man who's abandoned his faith. The child has a home, Noah said quietly, with her mother. And while I may have questioned much about traditional faith, I've never abandoned the principles that matter most. Compassion, protection of the vulnerable, respect for the dignity of all. Holloway sneered. Pretty words from a hypocrite. That's enough, William, Noah said, using his brother's given name for the first time. This isn't about our past. It's about Eliza's future and the welfare of her child. The use of his first name seemed to enrage Holloway. Don't you dare call me that, he hissed. You lost that right years ago. Brothers? Daniel asked, looking between the two men with sudden understanding. Your brothers? Half-brothers, Holloway corrected sharply, a fact I've spent years trying to forget. The revelation caused a stir among the other men. Isaiah looked particularly disturbed, as if this connection somehow altered his understanding of the situation. You never mentioned this, he said to Holloway accusingly. It wasn't relevant, Holloway replied, though his defensive tone suggested otherwise. It explains much about your eagerness to confront Mr. Blackwood, Powell observed dryly. One might even question whether personal grievance has colored your judgment in this matter. Holloway's hand moved reflexively to where his gun would normally be finding only empty air. His frustration was palpable. The legal order stands regardless of my relationship to the accused. Accused of what exactly? Noah pressed. You keep implying wrongdoing without specifying the offense. Before Holloway could respond, a new voice entered the conversation. There is no offense, Martha Reed said from the doorway, where she stood bundled against the cold. Only righteousness twisted to serve pride. All heads turned toward the unexpected arrival. Martha stepped fully into the room, snow-dusting her cloak. I apologize for the late hour, she said, addressing Eliza and Noah. When I learned of this midnight expedition, I felt compelled to follow. Mrs. Reed, Isaiah greeted her stiffly, this doesn't concern you. Doesn't it? Martha countered. When a new mother is being harassed hours after giving birth, I believe it concerns anyone with a conscience. She moved to stand beside Eliza, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. I was with Eliza when she first felt the child quicken. She said, the lie flowing smoothly from her lips. I know her mind on these matters. She is here by choice, and she will remain so if that is her wish. The support so openly and unequivocally offered brought tears to Eliza's eyes. Martha was risking her standing in the community to stand with her. The judge's order, Holloway began, was obtained under false pretenses, Martha interrupted, based on a forged letter and exaggerated claims. When Judge Cooper learns the full truth, including your personal vendetta against Mr. Blackwood, he will withdraw it immediately. Holloway's face contorted with rage. You have no authority here, widow. Step aside. Neither do you, Martha replied calmly. Not moral authority, at least. And I suspect your legal authority is hanging by a very thin thread. The standoff might have escalated further had Baby Hope not chosen that moment to begin crying in earnest, her wails filling the chapel with unmistakable hunger. Eliza adjusted her clothing to nurse the infant, the natural act bringing a hush to the room. In the face of this most basic maternal function, the argument seemed suddenly petty and distant. Even Holloway appeared momentarily disarmed by the sight of the newborn nursing at her mother's breast. Isaiah turned away, a mixture of propriety and emotion in the gesture. Daniel stared transfixed by the reality of his child now, a separate being with needs and rights of her own. The Miller brothers shifted uncomfortably clearly, feeling they had no place in this intimate scene, and Thomas Wright looked almost ashamed, as if some long-dormant conscience had been awakened. Powell took advantage of the moment to assert his medical authority. Gentlemen, he said firmly, this new mother needs rest, not stress. Whatever legal or moral claims you believe you have can be addressed in the light of day after a proper recovery period. The doctor is right, Martha added. Unless you intend to physically remove a woman who has just given birth from her bed, an act that would shock the conscience of any decent person, this discussion should be continued at a more appropriate time. Holloway looked ready to argue, but Isaiah surprised them all by raising a hand to silence him. Dr. Powell, he said, his voice strangely subdued. In your medical opinion, when would it be safe to move my daughter and granddaughter? The question, acknowledging both Powell's expertise and Eliza's maternal status, represented a subtle but significant shift in the Reverend's position. No less than a week, Powell replied promptly. Preferably 2, given the winter conditions and the infant's small size. Isaiah nodded slowly. Then we will return in 1 week, he decided, to continue this discussion when Eliza is stronger. He looked at his daughter, something unreadable in his eyes. Is that acceptable to you? The question, the first time he had asked rather than dictated, caught Eliza by surprise. Yes, she said cautiously, though my position will not change, Father. I will not return to your house, nor will I marry Daniel simply to satisfy propriety. Isaiah's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. We will discuss options, he said, all of us calmly and with clear heads. Holloway made a sound of protest, but Isaiah silenced him with a look. Enough, Sheriff. We came to ensure my daughter's welfare, not to create a spectacle. She is alive. The child is healthy, and Dr. Powell assures us she is in no immediate danger. The rest can wait. The Reverend's unexpected reasonableness shifted the energy in the room. The immediate threat of forced removal receded, replaced by an uneasy truce. Eliza, Daniel said, taking a step toward her. May I hold her, my daughter? Eliza hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse him this connection, this claim on Hope's life. But another part recognized that whatever his failings, Daniel was the child's father by blood. Denying that reality wouldn't change it. Not tonight, she said finally. She's just been fed and is falling asleep. But when you return, if you still wish it, yes. It was a small concession, but Daniel accepted it with a nod. Thank you, he said, and for once Eliza thought she heard genuine emotion in his voice. I'll come back, I promise. We've all heard your promises before, she replied, not unkindly but firmly. Actions matter more than words, Daniel. He flushed but didn't argue, moving toward the door with the others as they prepared to leave. Holloway went last, pausing to glare at Noah. This isn't over, brother, he said, the last word twisted into an insult. No, Noah agreed calmly. But it could be William if you would let old grievances rest. Holloway's only response was a contemptuous snort as he retrieved his gun belt and followed the others outside. When they had gone, with promises to return in a week, Eliza felt herself sag with exhaustion and relief. The confrontation had gone better than she had dared hope, though she harbored no illusions that the conflict was resolved. You need rest, Powell said, noticing her fatigue. Both of you do. The next week will bring its own challenges. Eliza nodded, her eyes meeting Noah's across the room. In his steady gaze, she found the strength she needed not just for herself now, but for the child sleeping peacefully against her breast. Will you stay the night, Doctor? Noah asked. The hour is late for traveling, and we would welcome your presence should Eliza or the baby need medical attention. Powell agreed readily, as did Martha, who had no intention of leaving Eliza's side so soon after the birth. Arrangements were made quickly. Powell would take the sofa, Martha would share Eliza's room, and Noah would remain in the loft as usual. As Powell and Martha settled in, Noah knelt beside Eliza's chair. You were magnificent, he said softly, facing them all with such courage, such clarity. Eliza smiled tiredly. I had good examples of courage to follow. Yours, Abigail's, in her own way. Even my mother's, though I barely remember her. Noah's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. What you said earlier about not returning to town or marrying Daniel. Did you mean it? Every word, Eliza confirmed. I won't go back to a life built on appearances rather than truth. I won't subject Hope to that. And after, Noah asked, his voice dropping lower, when you're recovered, when the immediate danger has passed, what then? Eliza knew what he was really asking about his offer before Powell's arrival, about the possibility of a future together, not just as protector and protected, but as equals, as family. Then we begin, she said simply, squeezing his hand. Not because I need shelter or protection, but because I choose to build something new with you, if that's still what you want. Noah's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and grief. It is, he assured her, more than anything. Above them, the converted chapel's timbers creaked softly in the winter wind, not in protest but in welcome, as if the old building itself approved of the new life beginning beneath its roof. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly across the Montana sky, the same stars that had witnessed countless beginnings and endings throughout human history. And inside, a family took shape not through blood or law or social convention, but through choice, through compassion, through love, freely given and received. Eliza, Noah, and the newborn Hope bound together by something stronger than the forces that had tried to separate them. As dawn approached and Eliza finally allowed herself to be helped to bed, Hope nestled securely beside her. In the quiet of her room with Martha sleeping nearby, she whispered a prayer of thanksgiving, not to her father's stern God, but to the gentler divinity she had discovered through her trials. Thank you for leading me here, she murmured, her hand resting protectively on her daughter's tiny form. Thank you for showing me that dignity can't be taken, only surrendered. And thank you for Noah, who taught me that faith isn't about certainty, but about hope. Outside her window, the first pale light of a new day touched the snow-covered pines. A beginning, Eliza thought, not an ending. 1 month later, as January surrendered to February, and the worst of winter's grip began to ease, Noah stood on the chapel's porch watching the sunrise paint the snow-covered valley in shades of pink and gold. The air was crisp, still cold enough to turn his breath to vapor, but lacking the bitter edge of deep winter. Behind him through the window, he could hear Eliza's voice, soft and melodic, as she sang to Hope. The sound wrapped around him like a warm blanket, a daily reminder of how completely his life had transformed. The confrontation a month ago had marked a turning point, not just for Eliza, but for Salvation Creek itself. Isaiah, faced with the reality of his granddaughter and the quiet dignity of his daughter, had begun a slow, halting journey toward reconciliation. He visited weekly now, sitting awkwardly with Hope in his arms, listening as Eliza spoke of her plans, her hopes, her memories of Elizabeth that Martha had helped her recover. Daniel Cooper, true to his word, had returned not to press his suit, but to acknowledge his daughter. He had signed papers drawn up by Judge Cooper himself, recognizing Hope as his child and providing financial support for her future. It wasn't love, but it was responsibility, a step toward the man he might yet become. Holloway remained hostile, but his power had waned. Judge Cooper, after learning of the sheriff's personal vendetta and abuse of authority, had ordered an investigation. There was talk of a new election in the spring, and Martha Reed, dear Martha, who had stood beside them when it mattered most, had become a fixture at the chapel, teaching Eliza the skills of motherhood, sharing stories of Elizabeth helping Noah expand the garden that would feed them when winter finally released its hold. As for Noah and Eliza, they had moved cautiously toward the future they had glimpsed in those fraught moments after Hope's birth. There had been a small ceremony 2 weeks ago with Powell and Martha as witnesses, Isaiah offering a surprisingly gentle blessing. Not a traditional wedding, Eliza had been clear she wanted no echo of the arrangement that had trapped Abigail, but a covenant of choice, of mutual respect, of shared purpose. The baby fussed inside, and Noah heard Eliza's footsteps crossing to the piano. A moment later, the notes of a lullaby drifted through the window, the same melody he had taught her that night by the fire now played with growing confidence. Noah closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. For so long, he had believed that grief had hollowed him out, leaving only echoes where joy had once lived. He had converted a chapel into a home, but had never expected it to feel truly inhabited again, not in the ways that mattered. Yet here he was standing on the threshold of a life he hadn't dared to imagine, filled with the small, miraculous sounds of family, Eliza's piano, Hope's cries and coos, Martha's laughter, even Isaiah's gruff attempts at conversation. Inside, Eliza began to sing, her voice joining the piano's notes. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Noah smiled at the irony of it, the hymn that had accompanied Hope's birth now serving as her lullaby, sung by a woman whose name echoed its central promise. Perhaps there was divine poetry in it after all, a meaning beyond coincidence. He turned from the sunrise and went inside, closing the door on winter's chill, stepping into the warmth of what had once been merely shelter, but was now undeniably home.